The auction house on station Virex 12 smelled like rust and despair. And Jake Morrison hated every second he spent inside. I had come looking for spare engine parts, not entertainment. But the crowd of aliens had pushed him deeper into the building until he found himself standing before a raised platform, where creatures were being sold like broken machinery. Jake was 34 years old, a human mechanic who had spent the last decade fixing ships on the outer rim stations where nobody asked questions and everybody paid in cash or credit chips that might or might not be legal. He watched as a Talaxian merchant purchased a six-legged beast for heavy labor, and then a Varathi trader bought a cage full of singing birds that would fetch high prices in the core worlds. The auctioneer, a four-armed creature with gray skin and yellow eyes, called for attention as workers dragged a small cage onto the platform. Next item, the auctioneer announced in a bored voice. One Corvasi dragon, approximately 12 cycles old. Condition is poor. Jake leaned forward to get a better look. The creature in the cage was about the size of a large dog, covered in scales that might have once been copper-colored, but now looked faded and dull. One of its wings hung at an awkward angle, clearly damaged long ago and never properly healed. The dragon lay on the cage floor with its head resting on its front claws, and its eyes stared at nothing with the hollow look of something that had given up on life. This specimen is defective, the auctioneer continued. It refuses to produce fire, will not fight, and has shown no response to standard training methods. A Zelkari priest in flowing purple robes stepped forward from the crowd. What is the starting price for this sacred vessel? The priest asked, starting at 50 credits. The auctioneer replied. Nobody raised a hand. 40 credits. Silence filled the room. 30 credits. The Zelkari priest shook his head and stepped back. 20 credits. Anyone? This creature still has value for ritual purposes. Jake watched the dragon lift its head slightly, and for just a moment their eyes met. There was something in that gaze, something that made Jake's chest feel tight. It was not the empty look of a mindless animal, but the weary expression of a being that understood exactly what was happening and had accepted its fate. 10 credits, the auctioneer said with growing frustration. Surely someone will pay 10 credits. The crowd remained silent, and a few aliens actually laughed. 5 credits. This is my final offer before we dispose of this creature. The Zelkari priest raised his hand. 3 credits, he said. I will pay 3 credits to take this dragon for proper sacrifice to our gods. The auctioneer sighed and nodded. 3 credits. Sold to the 4 credits, Jake heard himself say. Every head in the room turned toward him. The Zelkari priest stared at Jake with an expression of pure confusion. Human, the priest said slowly. Do you understand what you are bidding on? A dragon, Jake replied, and I bid 4 credits. This creature is meant for sacred sacrifice, the priest insisted. It has no other purpose. It cannot work. It cannot fight. It cannot even fly. 4 credits. Jake repeated. The priest narrowed his eyes and then waved his hand dismissively. Keep your broken prize, human. The gods do not need this defective offering. The auctioneer banged his staff against the platform. Sold to the human for 4 credits. Jake walked forward and handed over his credit chip, which left him with almost nothing until his next pay cycle. The workers shoved the cage toward him, and Jake grabbed the handle. You are a fool, a Talaxian merchant said as Jake passed. Humans and their ridiculous sentimentality. What will you do with it? Another alien asked with a mocking laugh. Teach it to fetch? Jake ignored them all and carried the cage through the crowded auction house toward the exit. The Zelkari priest appeared beside him just before he reached the door. Human, the priest said in a low voice. That creature is cursed. It was born under dark stars and has brought misfortune to everyone who has owned it. Maybe it just needs someone who does not want to kill it. Jake replied. The priest made a sound that might have been laughter or disgust. You understand nothing. That dragon comes from a bloodline of sacred vessels. Its only purpose is to die for the glory of our gods. Anything else is an abomination. Sounds like your gods need better hobbies, Jake said and walked out of the auction house. He carried the cage through the station corridors until he reached his workshop bay on the cargo hauler called the Dusty Road. The bay was small and cramped, filled with engine parts and tools and the smell of lubricant. But it was home. Jake set the cage on his workbench and opened the door. The dragon did not move. Come on, Jake said gently. You can come out now. Nobody is going to hurt you here. The dragon lifted its head and stared at Jake with those copper-colored eyes that held too much intelligence for a simple animal. I know you have been through bad times, Jake continued, but I'm not going to sacrifice you, or sell you, or make you fight. He reached into his food storage unit and pulled out a piece of dried meat. Are you hungry? He placed the meat near the cage door and stepped back. The dragon looked at the food and then looked at Jake. And something passed between them in that moment. It was not trust. Not yet, but maybe it was the first tiny seed of something that could grow into trust. The dragon did not eat the meat. It did not leave the cage. It simply laid its head back down and closed its eyes. Jake pulled up a chair and sat down beside the workbench. That is okay, he said softly. I am patient. I fix broken things for a living, and I have never met anything too damaged to save. He looked at the faded copper scales and the crooked wing and the thin body that showed too many ribs. I think I will call you Rusty, Jake decided, because you look like you could use some polish. The dragon did not respond, but Jake thought he saw one eye open just slightly. It was a start outside the workshop bay. The stars wheeled slowly past the viewport, and somewhere on the station, a Zelkari priest was already sending messages about the human who had stolen sacred property. But Jake did not know about that yet for now. He simply sat beside a broken dragon and waited for it to decide that maybe, just maybe, not everyone in the galaxy wanted to see it dead. 3 weeks passed on Station Virex 12, and Rusty still refused to eat when Jake was watching. Jake would leave food in the workshop bay and come back hours later to find it gone. So he knew the dragon was eating something, but every time he tried to share a meal, Rusty would turn away and pretend to sleep. You are the most stubborn creature I have ever met, Jake said one morning as he worked on a broken fuel injector. And I once fixed a ship for a Corellian trader who insisted the engine was fine while it was literally on fire. Rusty lay on a pile of old blankets that Jake had arranged in the corner of the workshop. Watching Jake work with those intelligent copper eyes, that was one thing that had changed over the weeks. Rusty watched everything now, whenever Jake picked up a tool or examined a broken part or welded two pieces of metal together. The dragon would lift his head and observe with focused attention. You like machines, Jake realized one day. You are watching me fix things because it interests you. Rusty blinked slowly, which Jake decided to interpret as agreement. Captain Lisa Chen stopped by the workshop that afternoon. Her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and her expression serious. Jake, we have a problem, she said. What kind of problem? The Zelkari Trade Guild kind, Lisa replied. There is a highkeeper named Vorath who arrived at the station yesterday, and he is asking questions about you and your dragon. Jake set down his welding torch and turned to face her. Asking what kinds of questions? The kinds that suggest he wants Rusty back, Lisa said. He claims you stole religious property and that you are violating sacred Zelkari laws. I bought Rusty at a legal auction for 4 credits. 3 credits, Lisa corrected. The records show you outbid the priest at 3 credits. And the Zelkari are arguing that religious property cannot be legally sold to outsiders. Jake looked at Rusty, who had lifted his head at the mention of the Zelkari. "I am not giving him back," Jake said quietly. "I saw what they wanted to do to him, Lisa. They were going to cut him open on an altar." "I know," Lisa said, "and I am not asking you to give him back. I am just warning you that this could get ugly." She left the workshop, and Jake sat down heavily on his work stool. Rusty made a soft sound, almost like a question. "Do not worry," Jake told him. "I did not buy you just to let someone else take you away." That night, Jake fell asleep at his workbench while studying technical manuals about dragon anatomy that he had downloaded from the station archives. He woke up hours later to find something warm pressed against his side. Rusty had left his blanket pile and curled up next to Jake's chair, his small body radiating heat like a living furnace. "Hey there," Jake whispered, afraid to move and break the moment. Rusty opened one eye and then closed it again. Pressing closer, Jake smiled and carefully reached down to rest his hand near Rusty's head, not touching, just offering. The dragon sniffed his fingers and then, very gently, pushed his snout against Jake's palm. It was the first time Rusty had voluntarily touched him. The next morning, Jake had an idea. He had been looking at Rusty's damaged wing for weeks, noting how the bones had healed at the wrong angle and left the wing permanently crooked. "I fix broken things," Jake said out loud. "And you are broken, so maybe I can help." He spent the next 3 days designing a brace. It was not complicated. Just a lightweight frame made from scrap titanium that would hold the wing in the correct position and allow the muscles to strengthen over time. When he finished, he set the brace on the workbench where Rusty could see it. "This is for you," Jake explained. "It might help your wing work better, but I am not going to force you to wear it." Rusty approached the workbench slowly and sniffed the brace, looked at Jake with an expression that seemed almost suspicious. "I know people have hurt you before," Jake said. "I know you have no reason to trust me, but I promise this is meant to help." He stepped back and sat in his chair, giving Rusty space for a long time. Nothing happened. Rusty circled the brace, examined it from every angle, and occasionally looked at Jake as if checking to make sure this was not a trap. Then, slowly, the dragon lowered his head and pushed the brace toward Jake. "You want me to put it on?" Jake asked. Rusty extended his damaged wing, and Jake felt his heart squeeze with something he could not name. He moved carefully, explaining every step as he worked. "This part goes here, and this strap connects there, and I'm going to tighten this just a little. Tell me if it hurts." When the brace was secure, Rusty experimentally moved his wing. It was not a full extension, not yet, but it was straighter than it had been in years. "How does that feel?" Rusty made a sound that was almost like a purr. "I will take that as good," Jake said with a grin that evening. Something else changed. Jake sat down to eat his dinner, a simple meal of synthetic protein and vegetables, and Rusty approached him. "Hungry?" Jake asked. He held out a piece of meat, and Rusty took it directly from his hand. Then the dragon settled beside Jake's feet and waited. "You want to eat together," Jake realized. "You do not eat alone because you were never supposed to be alone." He put some food in a bowl and set it on the floor next to his chair. They ate together in comfortable silence, and Jake understood that something important had shifted between them. Rusty was not just tolerating him anymore. Rusty was choosing him. A loud knock interrupted the moment, and Jake opened the workshop door to find a Zelkari guard standing in the corridor. "Human Jake Morrison," the guard announced. "High Keeper Vorith demands an audience regarding the stolen sacred vessel in your possession. I did not steal anything. You will present yourself at the station council chambers in 7 cycles." The guard continued as if Jake had not spoken. "If you refuse, the Zelkari Trade Guild will impose sanctions on this station and all ships that dock here." The guard turned and marched away without waiting for a response. Jake closed the door and leaned against it. Rusty pressed against his legs, and Jake reached down to stroke the dragon's head. "They are not going to stop," Jake said quietly. "They want you back. And they are willing to hurt a lot of people to get you." Rusty looked up at him with those copper eyes. And Jake saw fear there for the first time. "But I am not going to let them have you," Jake promised. "I do not know how yet, but I will find a way." He knelt down so he was at eye level with the dragon. "You trusted me with your wing. Now trust me with this, okay?" Rusty leaned forward and pressed his forehead against Jackie's. A warmth spread through Jake's mind. Not words exactly, but a feeling of gratitude and hope. "We will figure this out together," Jake whispered. "That is what partners do," and for the first time since the auction, Jake saw something in Rusty's eyes that looked like belief. Jake spent the next 5 days searching through every database he could access on the station, looking for information about Corvati dragons. Most of what he found was religious text from the Zelkari, describing the dragons as sacred vessels meant to carry prayers to the gods through their sacrifice. But buried deep in an old archive from a species called the Methrani, Jake found something different. The Corvati were partners. Jake read aloud while Rusty listened from his blanket pile. They were bonded companions to the Valori, an ancient species that traveled between stars using the dragons as living navigators. Rusty lifted his head, and Jake noticed that the dragon's breathing had changed. The Valori and Corvati lived together for 10,000 years. Jake continued, "The dragons could breathe fire that bent space itself, allowing ships to travel faster than light, and in return, the Valori cared for them, honored them, loved them." Jake scrolled through the ancient text, his heart growing heavier with each word. Then the Zelkari came, a young species hungry for power, and they wanted the dragons for themselves. He looked at Rusty and saw that the dragon's eyes were wet. The war lasted 200 years, and when it ended, the Valori were gone, every last one of them killed or scattered to the void. And the Zelkari claimed the dragons as spoils of conquest. Jake's voice cracked as he read the next part. But the Corvati remembered their partners, and they refused to serve their new masters. They stopped breathing fire, stopped navigating, stopped doing anything except waiting to die. He set down the datapad and moved to sit on the floor near Rusty. The Zelkari could not force them to work, so they declared the dragons sacred instead. They built a religion around sacrificing the creatures they could not control. And for 3,000 years, they have been killing your kind to honor gods that probably do not even exist. Rusty made a sound that Jake had never heard before. It was low and mournful, like the cry of something that had been carrying grief for longer than any being should have to carry it. "You understand everything I'm saying, do you not?" Jake asked softly. "You have always understood?" Rusty met his eyes, and in that gaze Jake saw the weight of 3,000 years of suffering. "I am so sorry." Jake whispered he did something then that he had not planned. He knelt, not the kneeling of a servant or a worshiper, but the kneeling of someone who wanted to be at the same level as another. He bowed his head. "I am sorry for what they did to your people," Jake said. "I am sorry for the Valori who loved you and could not protect you. I am sorry for every dragon that died on those altars. And I am sorry that the galaxy forgot you were ever anything more than animals." Tears fell from his eyes and landed on the workshop floor. "I cannot undo what happened, but I can promise you this. I see you. Rusty, I see who you really are. Not a sacred vessel, not property, not a broken thing to be discarded, but a person, a survivor. Someone who deserves to be free for a long moment." Nothing happened. Then Rusty rose from his blankets and walked toward Jake. The dragon's eyes began to glow with an inner light. Soft at first and then brighter, like copper coins catching the sun. Jake felt a warmth spreading through his mind. Not painful but overwhelming, and suddenly he understood things he had no way of knowing. He saw the Valori, tall beings with silver skin and kind eyes, building ships that danced between stars. He saw dragons flying in great formations. Their fire-weaving paths through the darkness of space. He saw love, partnership, family, and then he saw fire falling from the sky. Cities burning. Dragons screaming as their partners died. He saw chains and cages and altars stained with blood. Saw 3,000 years of captivity compressed into a single moment of shared grief. When the vision ended, Jake was crying harder than he had ever cried in his life. Rusty pressed against him, and Jake wrapped his arms around the dragon's neck. Corvethrix, Jake said, because now he knew the dragon's true name. Last son of the Flame Singers, Rusty Corvethrix made a sound that was almost like a sob. I have you, Jake whispered. I have you. They stayed like that for a long time. Human and dragon holding each other in a cramped workshop while the stars turned slowly outside. When Jake finally pulled back, he saw that Rusty had changed. The dragon's scales seemed brighter now, the faded copper regaining some of its original shine, and when Rusty extended his wing, the one Jake had braced, it moved smoothly, strongly, almost normally. You were waiting, Jake realized. You were waiting for someone to see you, really see you. And that was what was keeping you from healing. Rusty nudged Jake's hand with his snout. The workshop door opened, and Captain Lisa stepped inside. Jake. I need to. She stopped when she saw the dragon's glowing eyes and brightened scales. What happened? I learned the truth, Jake said, about what the Zelkari did, about what Rusty really is. And what is he? Jake stood and placed his hand on Rusty's head. He is the last survivor of a genocide. A prisoner of war who has been waiting 3,000 years for someone to remember that his kind were once free. Lisa stared at them both for a long moment. Varth is coming, she said finally. He has armed guards with him, and he is demanding you surrender the dragon now, not in 7 cycles. But now, Jake looked at Rusty. The dragon's eyes still glowed with that inner fire, and Jake felt the echo of their bond humming in his mind. Then I guess I better go meet him, Jake said. Jake. He has weapons. He has legal authority. He has a lie built on murder, Jake interrupted. And I have the truth. He walked toward the door with Rusty at his side. What are you going to do? Lisa asked. Jake paused at the threshold. I am going to introduce the galaxy to Corvethrix, last son of the Flame Singers. And then I am going to ask them to decide what kind of universe they want to live in. He stepped into the corridor, and Rusty walked beside him for the first time in 3,000 years. A Kovathi dragon moved through the stars, not as a prisoner or a sacrifice, but as a being choosing its own path, and at his side was a human mechanic who had paid 4 credits to save a life that the entire galaxy had decided was worthless. Sometimes the smallest price could buy the most precious thing. Sometimes all it took was someone willing to kneel in respect instead of standing in judgment. And sometimes, if you were very lucky, a broken dragon would choose to trust you with the fire that had been sleeping in its heart for 3,000 years. The station commons was packed with hundreds of beings from dozens of species, all gathered to witness the confrontation between a human mechanic and the Zelkari. Eyekeeper Jake walked through the crowd with Rusty at his side, and whispers followed them like ripples in water. Is that the dragon? Look at its eyes. They are glowing. I heard the human thinks it can talk. Highkeeper. Vorith stood on a raised platform at the center of the commons, wearing ceremonial robes of deep purple trimmed with gold, and flanked by 6 armed temple guards. His face was the color of pale ash, and his eyes were dark pools that held no warmth. Human, Vorith announced as Jake approached. You were given 7 cycles to surrender the sacred vessel. Yet you come here instead with defiance in your heart. I come here with truth in my heart, Jake replied. Which is more than you can say. The crowd murmured at his boldness. Station Administrator Grix, a heavy-set alien with blue skin and 3 eyes, stepped forward nervously. This tribunal will now come to order, Grix announced. Highkeeper Vorith has filed a formal complaint against human Jake Morrison for theft of Zelkari religious property. The Highkeeper may present his case. Vorith smiled. And it was not a pleasant expression. For 3,000 years, the Zelkari have been blessed guardians of the Kovathi dragons. Vorith began. These sacred vessels exist for one purpose only: to carry our prayers to the gods through the holy act of sacrifice. He gestured toward Rusty. This creature was legally designated as religious property of the Zelkari theocracy. It was offered for sale only because of its defective nature. And when I attempted to purchase it for proper sacrifice, this human deliberately outbid me. That is how auctions work, Jake said dryly. Silence, Vorith snapped. You had no right to purchase what belongs to the gods. And station law clearly protects religious property claims. Administrator Grix looked uncomfortable. The Highkeeper is correct that religious property protections are part of the station charter. Grix admitted, if this dragon is legally classified as Zelkari religious property, then Jake Morrison must surrender it. May I speak? Jake asked. Grix nodded. Jake stepped forward and looked out at the crowd. Highkeeper Vorith calls Rusty a sacred vessel, a thing meant for sacrifice. But I have evidence that the Zelkari are lying about what these dragons really are. Vorith laughed. Evidence from where, human? Your imagination? From the Methrony archives, Jake replied. Records that are older than your religion. The crowd stirred with interest. The Kovathi dragons were not always sacrificial animals, Jake continued. They were partners to an ancient species called the Valori. Intelligent beings who could breathe fire that bent space itself. Lies and fantasy. Vorith declared, the Zelkari conquered the Valori 3,000 years ago. Jake pressed on. They killed an entire civilization and enslaved the dragons. And when the dragons refused to serve them, the Zelkari built a religion around murdering them instead. This is outrageous, Vorith shouted. I will not stand here and listen to this human slander our sacred traditions. Then let the dragon speak for itself. Jake said. Silence fell over the comments. What did you say? Vorith asked. You claim this creature is just an animal, a vessel with no intelligence of its own. So let us test that claim. Jake looked at Administrator Grix. Let the dragon choose its own fate. If it truly has no intelligence, it will not understand the choice. But if it does understand, then everything the Zelkari have told us is a lie. Grix considered this for a long moment. That seems reasonable, the administrator said. Highkeeper, do you accept this test? Vorith's eyes narrowed, but he could not refuse without looking like he feared the outcome. Very well, he said. Bring the altar. The temple guards carried forward a stone platform covered in ancient symbols and stained with dark patches that Jake did not want to think about. Place it there, Vorith commanded. Pointing to one side of the commons, the guards obeyed. And Vorith turned to Jake, the altar on one side, you on the other. If the creature goes to the altar, you will accept the judgment of the gods and never interfere with Zelkari religious practices again. And if Rusty refuses the altar? Jake asked. Then I will withdraw my claim, Vorith said. Though his voice suggested he did not believe that would happen, Jake knelt beside Rusty. You heard him, Jake whispered. This is your choice, not mine. Whatever you decide, I will respect it. Rusty looked at Jake for a long moment. And then the dragon walked toward the center of the Tzioris. Commons, every eye in the room followed the small copper-scaled creature as it moved between the altar, and the Humanvrith began chanting in the Zelkari sacred tongue. Words that had been used for 3,000 years to lead dragons to their deaths. Rusty stopped in the middle of the commons. He looked at the altar, then at Jake, and then at something else entirely. He looked at the crowd. Hundreds of beings stared back at him, waiting to see what a broken dragon would choose. Rusty opened his mouth, and he roared. The sound shook the entire station. It was not just noise, but something that reached directly into the minds of everyone present. Jake felt it hit him like a wave. And suddenly, he was seeing through hundreds of eyes at once. The crowd gasped and screamed and cried as images flooded their consciousness. They saw the Valori, beautiful and kind, building cities that touched the clouds. They saw dragons flying free across an endless sky. They saw the Zelkari, ships descending like a plague of metal and fire. They saw the war, the death, the final moments of a civilization that had existed. For 10,000 years, they saw the chains, and the cages and the altars. They saw 3,000 years of dragons dying because they refused to forget the partners who had loved them when the vision ended. The commons was filled with the sound of weeping beings who had never cared about dragons, were crying for creatures they had just watched die in their minds. Even some of the temple guards had fallen to their knees with tears streaming down their face. Voreth alone remained standing, his face twisted with fury. "Deception," he screamed. "This is dark magic, heresy. The creature has poisoned your minds with lies." "Those were not lies," a Talaxian merchant shouted. "I felt their grief. I felt them dying. 3,000 years, a Varathi woman sobbed. "You have been murdering them for 3,000 years. The crowd began to turn on Voreth, anger replacing sorrow. "This changes nothing," Voreth insisted desperately. "Station law still protects our religious practices. Your religion is built on genocide," Jake said, his voice carrying across the commons. "And now everyone knows it." Voreth's face contorted with rage. He pulled a ceremonial blade from beneath his robes and lunged toward Rusty. "If I cannot have the creature, no one will." Jake moved without thinking. He threw himself between Voreth and Rusty, and the blade meant for the dragon cut across. Jake sighed instead. Pain exploded through his body as he fell to the floor. The crowd screamed. Rusty screamed, and then something happened that had not happened in 3,000 years. A Korvathi dragon breathed fire. It was not destructive flame, but something else entirely. A wave of golden light that surrounded Jake and Voreth. Both the light healed Jake's wound as if it had never existed, and it showed Voreth his own soul. Every dark thought, every cruel act, every prayer spoken over a dying dragon while pretending to serve the gods. Voreth collapsed, overwhelmed by the weight of what his vows people had done. The temple guards dropped their weapons and backed away. Administrator Grix stepped forward with shock written across all three of his eyes. "Highkeeper, Voreth has committed assault in violation of station law," Grix declared. "He will be detained pending investigation, and the Zelkari claim on this dragon is hereby rejected." The crowd erupted in cheers. Jake rose to his feet, completely healed, and Rusty pressed against his legs. "You saved me," Jake whispered. Rusty looked up at him with eyes that still glowed with inner fire, and Jake understood that this was only the beginning. The weeks following the tribunal changed everything. News of what happened at Station Virix 12 spread across the galaxy like wildfire, carried by merchants and travelers and journalists who could not believe what they had witnessed. A Korvathi dragon had roared, and the entire galaxy had heard the truth. Jake became famous almost overnight, though he insisted he had not done anything special. "I just bought a dragon for 4 credits, he told the reporters who flooded the station. Anyone else would have done the same thing, but that was not true, and everyone knew it. Thousands of beings had walked past Rusty's cage at that auction, and not one of them had seen anything worth saving. Only Jake had looked into those copper eyes and recognized a person instead of a thing. Rusty, or Carvethrix, as he was properly known, now had become a symbol of hope for oppressed beings throughout the galaxy. His image appeared on protest signs and solidarity messages, and the phrase, "Remember the flame," singers became a rallying cry for those fighting against injustice. The Zelkari theocracy was in chaos. Younger generations who had grown up believing their religion was holy and just were now confronting the reality that their faith was built on 3,000 years of murder. Some refused to accept the truth, calling the tribunal a human conspiracy, but many others turned against the old ways, demanding that the remaining Kovati dragons be freed and the practice of sacrifice be ended forever. High Keeper Vorith remained in station custody, facing charges not just for his attack on Jake, but for crimes against sentient beings that stretched back millennia. The Galactic Council had opened an investigation into Zelkari practices, and for the first time in 3,000 years, the dragons had allies in positions of power. There are 17 Kovati dragons still alive in Zelkari captivity, Captain Lisa reported one morning as she sat in Jake's workshop. The council is negotiating for their release. Jake looked at Rusty, who lay on his blanket pile with his eyes half closed. Did you hear that? Jake asked. You might not be alone anymore. Rusty opened his eyes, and Jake felt a pulse of emotion through their bonded was hope, fragile but real. The first hope the Flame Singers had felt in 3,000 years. What happens when they are freed? Jake asked Lisa. Scientists want to study them. Diplomats want to use them as symbols. Religious groups want to worship them. Lisa shrugged. Everyone has an opinion about what the dragons should do with their freedom. What about what the dragons want? Lisa smiled. That is a very human question, Jake. A knock at the workshop door interrupted them, and Jake opened it to find a well-dressed alien with silver skin and gentle eyes. Jake Morrison? The alien asked. That is me. I am Ambassador Veth of the Galactic Council. May I come in? Jake stepped aside, and the ambassador entered the workshop when Veth saw Rusty. He bowed deeply. Corvathrix, last son of the Flame Singers. I bring greetings from the council and an apology from the galaxy that failed your people. Rusty lifted his head and regarded the ambassador with those glowing copper eyes. The council would like to offer Corvathrix a position. Veth continued. As a living witness to history, his presence at council meetings would remind all species of the importance of protecting the rights of every sentient being. Jake looked at Rusty. What do you think? Through their bond, Jake felt Rusty's answer was not words exactly, but a clear sense of purpose mixed with hesitation. He is honored by the offer, Jake translated, but he has a different idea. What would that be? There are 17 dragons still in captivity, Jake said. Rusty wants to find them, free them, and help them remember who they are. The ambassador nodded slowly. That is a noble goal. But traveling across Zelkari space would be dangerous. You would need resources, protection. A ship. I have a ship, Captain Lisa said from her seat in the corner. The dusty road is not fancy, but she is tough, and her crew would follow Jake anywhere. Veth raised an eyebrow. You would risk your vessel for this mission? I watched that dragon share 3,000 years of grief with a room full of strangers, Lisa replied. I think helping his people is the least we can do. The ambassador considered this for a long moment. The council could provide funding and diplomatic credentials. Veth finally said, we could make the Dusty Road an official humanitarian vessel, protected under galactic law. Jake felt a surge of excitement through his bond with Rusty. Is that a yes? Jake asked the dragon. Rusty stood and walked to Jake's side, pressing against his legs. Then the dragon turned to the ambassador and dipped his head once. I believe that is a yes, Veth said with a smile. 3 days later, the Dusty Road launched from Station Virex 12 with a new mission. Jake stood on the bridge beside Captain Lisa, watching the stars stretch into lines as the ship entered faster than light travel. Rusty sat beside him, his scales now gleaming with their full copper brilliance, his healed wing tucked neatly against his body. 17 dragons scattered across Zelkari space, Lisa said. This could take years. Then it takes years, Jake replied through their bond. Rusty sent an image. Dragons flying together through an endless sky, their fire weaving paths between the stars. That is what we are fighting for, Jake said softly. A message came through the ship's communication system, and Lisa frowned as she read it. We have a request from the Galactic Council already, she said. A reporter wants to interview you about the mission. She's asking what made you spend your last credits on a broken dragon. Jake laughed. Tell her I did not spend my last credits. I have 4 credits left after I bought Rusty. That is not the point of the question. Jake. He looked at Rusty, remembering that day at the auction, when a faded dragon with a broken wing had looked at him with eyes full of resignation. Tell her that sometimes the most valuable things in the universe are the ones nobody else wants, Jake said. Tell her that every being deserves someone who will look at them and see more than their damage. He knelt beside Rusty and scratched behind the dragon's ears. Tell her that 4 credits bought me a partner, a friend, and a purpose, Rusty rumbled with contentment. And tell her that somewhere out there, 17 dragons are waiting for someone to remember that they matter. Lisa nodded and began typing the response. Dusty Road flew on through the darkness between stars, carrying a human mechanic and the last free dragon toward an uncertain future. They did not know what challenges lay ahead. They did not know if they would succeed in freeing the other dragons, but they knew one thing with absolute certainty. They were not alone, and sometimes that was all anyone really needed in his blanket pile on the bridge. Rusty closed his eyes and dreamed of fire, not the fire of destruction that the Zelkari had tried to force from his kind, but the fire of connection, the flame that linked minds across the void of space, somewhere far away. Another dragon lifted its head. It had been alone for so long, forgotten in a temple cage, waiting for a death that never seemed to come. But now, for the first time in centuries, it felt something: hope. The flame was spreading, and it had started with a human who paid 4 credits for a useless dragon, and then knelt before it in respect instead of demanding sacrifice. That was the power humans brought to the galaxy, not strength or technology or conquest, but the simple, stubborn belief that every life had value, and the willingness to fight for that belief, no matter the cost.